It's still Yud Aleph Nissen in the afternoon, and I'm recording the fourth part of the series of classes on the Rebbe's Perek Kuf Chof Beis. The first two classes were introductory, and the last class was on Possuk Aleph and Beis. And if I had to summarize what those two classes were about, and it's really the Nakud of the whole Perek, is that Beis Hashem Neilech, when we go to the Beis HaMikdash. Because when we go to the Beis HaMikdash, Yerushalayim, we meet Yerushalayim. And the whole Perek is about Yerushalayim. And all the Mailas of Yerushalayim, Shalom, and Shalom, and Re'iyah, and Yiro, and Yoifi, and Kedusha Nitzchis. But it's all because of its proximity to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Beis HaMikdash is called Beis Hashem Neilech. It's a place of Mahalach. Yerushalayim is Oimdois, Amida. Now Amida is the Mile of Bittel. But the Amida of Yerushalayim is only a segue, is a setup to Beis Hashem Neilech. And the Beis HaMikdash is going to be a Mahalach. Now we're going to learn the third Possuk, which is the most powerful, the most involved Possuk in the Perek in terms of material, right? Yerushalayim habnou'ha, the city of Jerusalem, which is already constructed, or as someone translated, permanently constructed. Ka'ir, as the city Shachubra, which has others attached to it, or that attaches other to it, or that it creates attachment between many. Yachdav, into a union, into a unity. This Possuk is describing the city of Yerushalayim. Of course, the next Possuk, Shesham Mol Shvatim, and then Shama Yashur Kisas Lamishpat, is further describing Yerushalayim. But more than those two Psukim describe Yerushalayim, this Possuk describes Yerushalayim. And the key words are the words Shachubra Layacht, Lashon Chavros, partnership, Chaveirim, and Chibur, connection. And of course, there's so many different insights into what this Chibur is. Rashi actually says that the Chibur is the Chibur of Shiloi and Yerushalayim, that Shiloi is called Menucha, that there were Mishkanes, right? There was a Mishkan in the Midbar, there was a Mishkan in Gilgal, there was a Mishkan in Noivegivain. Those are all temporary. Mishkan Shiloi, which stood for 369 years, is called Menucha, has a certain permanence. And during the time of Mishkan Shiloi, you were not allowed to bring Kabbanas in a Bama. But when Mishkan Shiloi was destroyed, you could again bring a carbon in a Bama. Mashenkin, once the Beis HaMikdash was built, so there's no place for carbones except for the Haramiri and the Beis HaMikdash. You cannot bring a carbon outside the Beis HaMikdash. So Rashi actually says Chubra Lo Yachdo means the joining together of Mishkan Shiloi, which was temporary, which was partially permanent for the duration of its standing, and the Beis HaMikdash, which is permanent absolutely. And the city of Yerushalayim is Chubra Lo, is the place which is bound to the binding of Shiloi and Yerushalayim. And of course, in addition to that simple interpretation, there's the interpretation of Chubra Lo, that Yerushalayim is Chubra Lo to the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi says that the Beis HaMikdash has no, the Yerushalayim has no Kedusha until the Beis HaMikdash is built, or the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, the status, the unique special place Yerushalayim holds in the world and in the Jewish people and in the Torah, is not complete until Chubra Lo, till it's adjacent to the Beis HaMikdash and to the Mizbeach and the Karbonis and to the Lishkas HaGozis and all the other things that the Beis HaMikdash entailed. So we're talking about Yerushalayim, we're not talking about the Beis HaMikdash. But we're arguing that what makes Yerushalayim is its chavros, it's its neighborliness, its connectedness. Either it's connecting different Batei Mikdash, or the fact that it is proximate, it is close to the Beis HaMikdash, and its status is defined by that proximity, by that closeness. And the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, which dominates this Perek, is based on that proximity, on the closeness between Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash. But the Perek is not about the Beis HaMikdash, it's about Yerushalayim. So although I'm going to continue reminding you that this Kedusha is really not the Yerushalayim itself, it's the Beis HaMikdash ultimately, but it's how the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, but this Perek deals with Yerushalayim, not with the Beis HaMikdash. So when you talk about Yerushalayim being holy, and again, it's holy because of its proximity to the Beis HaMikdash, there's a number of dimensions. The first is a very physical dimension. It's a very, very special place. And what makes Yerushalayim special, here I go again, is because of the Beis HaMikdash, but the specialness of Yerushalayim you can see in the city itself. Like we learned in the previous Possuk. When you come to Yerushalayim, you stop. Because Yerushalayim itself draws your attention. First of all, it's a very, very beautiful city physically. And it says in the Mefarshim that Shachubra lo Yachdav means that when the city was built, they called together every architect, every engineer, every designer, every builder who was worth his salt in the world at that time, and they had them collaborate and contribute to make Yerushalayim physically beautiful. Moreover, it was designed in such a way that they were all satisfied. Everybody went away happy. There's a sefer that I found, which is called Rabbi Yosef Chiyun's Pirush on Tilim. He's a Sfardi, I think. He lived a long time ago, maybe 500 years ago. His interesting Pirush on Tilim. Much of what he says in the other Mefarshim. But here he adds one more detail about Shachubra lo Yachdav. And I mentioned it in an earlier class. Shachubra lo Yachdav means that Yerushalayim was built based on the urban planning. Before they put down their first brick, they knew exactly how the city is going to look. So it's not a hodgepodge of different communities that came together in whatever ways. It was built with a perfect design. And that balance and that order and that beauty and that symmetry of design, which was a physical beauty, was a symptom of a spiritual beauty. And that's part of Shachubra lo Yachdav. First of all, you go all the architects in the world together to make a beautiful house. Second of all, you build it in such a way that all the different people who come there are all going to find it beautiful and attractive to them, in spite of the variety of their different tastes. And third of all, it's built as a single unit. Chubra lo Yachdav. And this is a physical manifestation of spiritual beauty. The spiritual beauty is, first of all, that has many people in it. The word binyan, abnuyas, and the word bonim, like it says in Pashas Vayetze, ibone gamanechim imen loshen binyan. Bonim, binyan goes on children. And it's of course reminiscent of Pashas Bereishis, where the Eibishter creates Chava, Vayiven. And Vayiven is interpreted by Rashi like a migdal. They should be able to hold children. But Vayiven is also from the word Bina, understanding. Because Bina, you say the Nitna B'isha, Yesma B'ish, and Vayiven is also from the word Bonim. So Yerushalayim Habnuya means a city which is built and beautiful because of the children who inhabit it. Like it says in the Mefarshim, in most places you have a variety of people, and you have a handful of people who are Yerei Shamayim, who are trustworthy and reliable and steadfast and dedicated. In Yerushalayim, everybody is trustworthy and reliable and steadfast and dedicated. The city elicits from the people a standard of perfection in Avodas Hashem, which makes them as beautiful as the city in which they live. The Meiri, who's bringing these different interpretations, also says that it goes on to Midei Chachomim. Shaim Abnuyah is like V'chol Banayach L'midei Hashem, but Banayach L'Abonayach. That Banayach means Eibish's children. And the Altikri reads Banayach, the builders. And of course in Chassidus, Banayach, his children is Bina, Boinayach is Chochma, like it says in Maimorim, I think in Pashas Re'eh, in the Kutatei in Dvarim. So the idea of Yerushalayim Habnuya doesn't only mean the walls of the city itself. Yerushalayim Habnuya means the inhabitants. It's inhabited by good people. It's inhabited by many, many Talmidei Chachamim who are called Bonim and Boinim. Chol Banayach Mu'ed Hashem T'Kei Banayach L'Boinoyach. They were the Eibishter's builders, Kayachal, the way all these inyarim are explained in Chassidus, which means that we're not just takers, we're also contributors. Kayachal, we're giving back to Elokus. All of this is describing the physical beauty of Yerushalayim as it reflects itself not just in the buildings but in the people, and it's a symptom of the fact that it's Chubra lo Yachdav, it's near the Beis HaMikdash. And because it's near the Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis HaMikdash is a place of Kedusha and Tahara, of Tahara and Kedusha, of Shechina and Kedusha, therefore in Yerushalayim you have this order and this beauty. And of course this is also going to be spelled out in the next psukim, when we're going to say Shesham ol l'shvatim shiftika edus liYisrael edus l'Shem Hashem, that the Yidden come up to Yerushalayim and they have a variety of different aliyahs, shvatim, shiftika, and edus, and then the Possuk after that, Shama Yashu Kises LaMishpat, Kises Leveis David. It's a place of Torah, and all of these aspects are symptoms of Yerushalayim הבנוי'ה כי שחוברה יחדיו. So that's the first dimension of Yerushalayim הבנוי'ה, means the physical Yerushalayim, and its beauty and its order and its depth and the people that it engenders, that it develops as a symptom of proximity to the Beis HaMikdash. But then there's another pshat, and this of course is in the Gemara, that Yerushalayim shel mata is mechuvek next to Yerushalayim shel Maila. And this I spoke about at length in my introduction, that I brought from the Siches in Chelik Tezayin, Chelik Chaf Aleph, and then Chelik Chaf Gimel, the Ramemi Panu, who says Teira medaberes b'alyenim u'menamezes b'shniyos b'tachtenim, which means the Teira speaks first of all spiritually, and second of all practically. And in a perfect world, the spiritual and the practical and the actual are aligned. What's lamayla is lamata, which would mean that since mystically and spiritually a year is 365 and a quarter days exactly, like Tufa Shmuel, that's how it manifests in the physical world, that a year would be 365 and a quarter days. But now in Zman HaGolus, and as time passes it changes more and more, we have what's called Tkufas Rav Ade, where a year is 365 days and 5 hours and change, and it's getting smaller and smaller very slowly, which changes the length of a year, and it affects all kinds of things over long periods of time, because heaven and earth are disaligned. And the second example, of course, is that we have in Torah medical remedies. We have in Torah a diet to stay healthy, that the halacha says nishtanu ativ, and we don't practice them. And the $1,000,000 question is, if a Torah he needs, a Torah is forever, how could it be that something that's written in Torah doesn't apply? And the answer is the Torah is eternal. It's not the Torah that's changed, it's the world that's changed. Because since it's possible that the Tachten should have, so to speak, floated away from its alignment with the Elyon. And in floating away its alignment with the Elyon, you cannot practice down here those aspects of medicine and of diet that in a perfect alignment between heaven and earth we would practice on earth, because the world is different, not because the Torah is different. But not Yerushalayim. That's the whole world. That's Eretz Yisrael. That's Chutz La'aretz, but not Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash are always aligned. The alignment between Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata and Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata, the earthly Beis HaMikdash and the heavenly Beis HaMikdash, and the earthly city of Yerushalayim and the heavenly city of Yerushalayim is permanent and constant and never changes. And that's the meaning of the words Yerushalayim הבנוי'ה כי שחוברה יחדיו, the alignment of the heavenly Jerusalem and the earthly Jerusalem, even though the earthly Jerusalem may be destroyed and the earthly Beis HaMikdash may be destroyed, it never changes. There's always a parallel between the Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata and Shel Maila. There's always a parallel between Yerushalayim Shel Mata and Yerushalayim Shel Maila. And that's why it's brought in Halacha and in Rashi and Chumash that you daven towards Eretz Yisrael if you live in Chutz La'aretz, you daven towards Yerushalayim if you live in Eretz Yisrael, you daven towards the Beis HaMikdash if you live in Yerushalayim, you daven towards Ma'ala if you're in the Beis HaMikdash itself, because that's where the Shechina is, and the Ikin is Vezeh Sha'ar HaShamayim. It's the gateway to heaven. From Yerushalayim Shel Mata you ascend to Yerushalayim Shel Maila. From Beis HaMikdash Shel Mata you ascend to the Beis HaMikdash Shel Maila, because they're always aligned. Why? Because the Kedusha of it is the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kedusha of Yerushalayim we didn't create. The Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael we made, which is why there's idea of Kedusha Rishoni Kitcha L'Shaita, and only Kedusha Shniya Kitcha L'Shaita L'Yasad Lavi, because we Mekadesh it through Kibush, and it's like we took it from Goyim could take it from us, and the Kedusha goes away. Mashenkin by Yishenim, which was Mekadesh through Chazaka. But the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim became Kadesh with the Shechina. And because they became Kadesh with the Shechina, and Shechina ain't a Betela, the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash and the Kedusha of Yerushalayim is constant. And I'm applying that idea to this idea, that because Shechina ain't a Betela, and the Kedusha of Yerushalayim and the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash never changes, therefore the lower Jerusalem and the lower Beis HaMikdash and the higher Jerusalem and the higher Beis HaMikdash are in perpetuity, are always aligned. And that's why you daven towards the Beis HaMikdash. And the Kedesh HaKadoshim, Gustav Tfilas go up to the Yebishter. But I just want to add that even though the Rambam's lashon is Shechina in the B'Teila, but we know that higher than Shechina is Kedusha, and in Torah language it's Mishkan and Mikdash. The mobile house of God is called a Mishkan, and the Gemara says it's also called a Mikdash. The permanent house of God is called a Mikdash, but it's also called a Mishkan, because both of them have the level of godliness which is called Shechina, means godliness which is manifest, and the level of godliness which is called Kedusha, which is hovering. And when the Shechina is present in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kedusha hovers. If the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, the Shechina goes into Golus, which is called Golus HaShechina, and the holiness departs. But when there's a Beis HaMikdash standing, the Shechina rests and the Kedusha hovers above it. So the Rambam paskins that when it comes to Yerushalayim, comes to the Beis HaMikdash, and it comes to Yerushalayim, Shechina ain't a B'Teila. The Shechina does not experience Golus HaShechina, however you understand it. So l'cha'ir, this means that somehow even as Managol is the presence of Kedusha v'adayin tzadachiyah. But this is l'cha'ir the pshat, that because of the holiness of the presence of Hashem in this place, the disalignment between heaven and earth never takes place. Yerushalayim shel mata and Beis HaMikdash shel mata is always mechuven and mechuven to Yerushalayim shel Maila and the Beis HaMikdash shel Maila. And that's a deeper pshat in Yerushalayim habnou'ha, ka'ir shechubra lo yachdiv. There's alignment between the heavenly Yerushalayim and the earthly Yerushalayim. But there's a third pshat, and the third pshat is really mind-blowing. And the third pshat is based on a Gemara, also a Gemara, that the Gemara says lo ove b'Yerushalayim shel Maila. I will not enter the heavenly Jerusalem until I enter the earthly Jerusalem, which seems very, very counterintuitive. Why? Because other parts of the world we say Teira and the Beres Bal Yenim. So the Eibishter's presence in Teira Bal Yenim is always present. And when it comes to Tachteinim, we say Meramez as Bishnias, but Tachteinim it's associated, but Tachteinim is secondary. It's possible there should be disaligned, that shouldn't happen. Here we're saying Fakert. Not only are the two Batei Mikdash aligned, and the two Yerushalayim aligned, that what's happening Lamala is happening Lamata, but Hashem says, I will not enter into Yerushalayim Shel Maila until they enter into Yerushalayim Shel Mata. And they connect it to a Possuk. And of course the Poshet, the Pshat is, because the Eibishter likes what we work on, what we do, and what we do is down here. So the Eibishter says, I'm not going to enjoy my Yerushalayim Shel Maila, which is constant until the Yidden bring themselves and me into the Yerushalayim Shel Mata. But I think there's a deeper pshat. It's not only that the Eibishter loves the work that we do, and therefore he subjects his allowance of himself, his allowing himself to enter into Yerushalayim Shel Maila, in our bringing him Kvayachal through avoid into Yerushalayim Shel Mata. But the deeper pshat is that this world is higher than the higher worlds. This world is higher than the higher worlds. And I will not come into Yerushalayim Shel Maila, the higher Yerushalayim, until I first come into the Yerushalayim Shel Mata, the lower Yerushalayim, which is this world, because coming into the lower Yerushalayim is higher than the higher Yerushalayim. So first of all, we have the idea of Nesava Kadosh Baruch Eliyas Leis Baruch Dira B'Tachteinim. Hashem desires to have a home for himself in the lowest worlds, and it's brought in Chassidus. It's mentioned in Tanya. I should say that's hinted in Tanya and mentioned brought in Chassidus. That Lamati of Atzmus, and Lamal is only Gilui, meaning this world has advantages over the higher worlds, and therefore the nature of the Chubra, Irsha Chubra La Yachdav, is first here then there, because this is Atzmus and that's Giluyim. So Irsha Chubra La Yachdav means that the lower Yerushalayim and the higher Yerushalayim are always aligned, but the nature of the alignment between the lower Yerushalayim and the higher Yerushalayim is that this Yerushalayim is first, because this is the Kavanah of the Eibishter and Sava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyas Leis Baruch Dira B'Tachteinim. And then of course in Tanya chapter 53, Alter Rebbe brings noch a kvetch, and the other kvetch is the luchas. And the luches have choros ala luches carved into the luches, and the asias hachakika which are carved into the luches is higher than Atzilus, and the luchas are dafka lamata. As Alter Rebbe says in the second Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash was a place of Kedusha, a place of Shechina, but the higher worlds are higher than the lower worlds. But in the first Beis HaMikdash, when the Aron and the Luchas were there by Pashtos, this physical world had an advantage over the higher worlds. And that's the pshat in this Gemara that the Eibishter says, Lo Ovi B'Yerushalayim Shel Maila. Adash Ovi B'Yerushalayim Shel Mata, because the Yerushalayim Shel Mata has an advantage over the Yerushalayim Shel Maila. And I just want to throw out that if you look in Sefer HaMaimorim Tov Reish Mem Gimel, page Lamed Ches, the Rebbe Rashab says in the top of the page, Achidish Nifle in Segrayim, that because this world is Atzmas, the lowest world, And in order to get to this, the lowest world, you have to pass with the Elam Yenim. So by association, since the lowest world is Atzmos, and the lowest world is only reached to the higher world, in as much as the higher worlds give life to the lower worlds, they experience the Atzmos of the lower world as well. And that's the pshat. All Yerushalayim shall Maila. There will not be a Gili Atzmos. In Yerushalayim shall Maila, Ad should all Yerushalayim shall Mata. It's based on the fact that Atzmos is Lamata. So I just gave you 3 translations of Shachubra la Yachdav. Number 1, the physical chavros of the city on the very physical level. Number 2, the alignment between Yerushalayim shall Maila and Yerushalayim shall Mata, the higher Jerusalem, the lower Jerusalem, the higher Beis HaMikdash, lower Beis HaMikdash. And number 2, that there's an advantage in the lower one over the higher one. But there's more. There's much, much more to this. There's much more. What's the more? But first of all, this advantage, this uniqueness of the city of Yerushalayim goes back to Samachti be'emli beis Hashem nelech, and the different interpretations, meaning before Jerusalem was built and while Jerusalem is standing and after Jerusalem is destroyed. Always you have this Samachti be'emli, always had this Shachubra la Yachdav, the physical Yerushalayim is connected to Yerushalayim on high. But in addition, you have the idea that the city of Yerushalayim creates bonds. Earlier we discussed how it creates bonds between people, between the organization. But now we're going to talk about the union of Chaveirim as it is in Halacha. And I mentioned this also in my earlier introductory classes, that in Jewish law, in the second Beis HaMikdash, they found that a lot of Yidden were careful in Truma, but they were not careful in Trumas Meiser, which is also Truma. It's also Misa B'dei Shamayim. Like we had in today's Rambam, Yud Aleph Nisan Tavshin Pei Gimel, we learned the Yilku Zorim, including those that are Misa B'dei Shamayim. So the Chachamim realized that there were Jews who were not careful about the matanes. They made a new category called Chaveirim, Chavros. And you became a Chaver through your actions, you became a Chaver through your Talmud Torah, your family became Chaveirim because their association with you, Eishes Chaver Kechaver, the family of a Chaver is like a Chaver, until they show themselves to violate the laws of Chavers, in which case we do not trust them, even though their father remains a Chaver, even though their husband remains a Chaver. But there's an assumption that Eishes Chaver Kechaver. So when the Chazal in the second Beis HaMikdash saw this deficiency in Trumas Meiser, they made a category of Chavros. Chavros means a Jew who's trustworthy to be Nizir and Dmai, to take Trumas Meiser from Meiser. And you became a Chaver by your behavior or by your status. Your family became a Chaver by their association with you, like the famous expression, Eishes Chaver Kechaver, and so on and so forth. And if your children moved out, their status could change, and so on. But Chavos was a delineation. It identified you as a trustworthy person. Remember, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, you had to worry about matanas, Truma, Meiser, and so on. And you also had to worry about Tum and Tara. And the Chaveirim were nizar to be echel to Chulin b'Tara. They were nizar to be echel Chulin b'Tahara. So you had Yidden who were not Chaveirim, and you couldn't trust their Dmai. If you got food from them, you had to separate Trumas Meiser. And you also worried about their Chulin. The Chulin could be not al Taras HaKodesh. You had to be careful. But the halacha was, when it came to the Beis HaMikdash, Ish Echad Chaveirim, all Yidden are Chaveirim. They have a status of Chavlas. And the Possuk says, Yerushalayim abnu'ha shachubra lo yachdav. When you come into the city of Yerushalayim, you automatically become a Chaver. So the Chazal say, so maybe any time any Jew comes to the Beis HaMikdash to become a Chaver, and the answer is Yachdav. It's only when all the Jewish people come together in Aliyah L'Regel, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, when all Yidden came to the Beis HaMikdash, every person, including an Am HaArif, was trusted as a Chaver. You could trust his grain, you could trust his matanis, you could eat his bread without having to worry about Trumas Meiser, and you didn't worry about Tum and Tara. The minute Yom Tov was over, not only did he stop being a Chaver, but things that he touched on Yom Tov that you were able to participate become tummy backwards. That's the power of Chavros. And this is part of the idea of Yerushalayim abnu'ha shachubra lo yachdav. The Kedusha of Yerushalayim is the physical city, the alignment between the physical city and the spiritual city, and how the physical city may have an advantage over the spiritual city. And it played itself out in Achdus Yisrael. Like the Rebbe says that the Iker point to this Pedic is Shalom. Like it says, Yishalom b'chel shal ba'amanei sayich. Shalosh leimir shaloim yishlo yavoyich Yishalom b'chel shal ba'amanei sayich. So in Yerushalayim there was Chavros. What I find so fascinating is that the Chazal are linking a din bein adam la'makom with a din bein adam la'chaveirei. Bein Adam Lamakom, a person has to be nizir not to eat tevel, not to eat food which didn't separate Trumas Ma'aser. And Bein Adam Lamakom, a person has to be careful about Tum and Tari. You're allowed to eat Chulin B'Tumah, but if you eat Chulin B'Tumah, you may not be careful when it comes to Tares. So therefore, the Chaveirim took upon themselves to be Eichel Turim Chulin B'Tahara. When a person is your friend, even though he's an Am Ha'aretz, his Chavros in Ben Adam LaChaveirim makes him a Chav Ben Adam LaMakom. But it's not just your friend, it's Yachdav, it's a whole nation together. This is the power of the city of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim Abnuyah Ki Shchobra Lo Yachdav. It creates Chaveirim out of everybody. It raises everybody up. It brings everybody into a state of Chavros. Again, a notion of binding us all together. And the Tzemach Tzedek has a lot of Chassidus on this Possuk. And of course, the Chassidus is various, and it's based a lot on Zohars. But one of the ideas which dominates the Tzemach Tzedek's Chassidus in this Possuk is the idea of binding higher and lower. And he gives a variety of different examples in Avodah of binding higher and lower in a person. For example, in addition to the basic idea of the heavenly Beis HaMikdash and the earthly Beis HaMikdash, there is the binding of two Yerushalayims. There's the Yerushalayim of Malchus, there's the Yerushalayim of Bina, there's the Yud-Kei and there's Vav-Kei, and there's joining them together. There's Alma Desgasia and Alma Desgalia, and joining them together. The power of Yerushalayim is Shchobra LaYachdav. It's a city which brings together different things which are otherwise separate. And I'm sorry for bringing this up for the 17th time. It's all not because of Yerushalayim itself. It's because of Beis Hashem Neilech. It's because of the Shechina and the Kedusha which rests in the Beis HaMikdash. Amongst the points that the Tzemach Tzedek brings about the idea that Shchobra LaYachdav joins together different ideas in Avodah is the idea that we have in the Medrash, that we know this from the Maimorim, that the Jewish people are called Bas. And this idea, it's brought in Kabbalah that Yerushalayim is called Achais Aim. Achais means connection. And the city of Yerushalayim connects the different levels of Yidden, the level of Bas, which is lower than the level of Achais, and the level of Achais, which is lower than the level of Aim. And in the city of Yerushalayim, these three ideas, the level you're a Makabal, the level where you're a Mashpia and a Makabal, and the level where a person is a Mashpia Talakus, in Yerushalayim, these various ideas join together and they become one. Another example that he brings is the Mesiras Nefesh of Echad and the Mesiras Nefesh of B'chol Nafshecha. L'cher, the Mesiras Nefesh of Echad is higher, and the Mesiras Nefesh B'chol Nafshecha is lower. And part of the idea of Shchobra LaYachdav is bringing these ideas of Mesiras Nefesh together. And another idea that he brings is the idea of the Yichud, of the Bittul of Yichudei Allah and the Bittul of Yichudei Torah. Yichudei Allah is higher, Yichudei Torah is lower. But Yichudei Torah is one mile of Yichudei Allah that it doesn't have a richness. There's no Yisreimamus. Right? Bittul B'Mitzias is I'm one with a Lakus, but you feel uplifted by the godliness. Bittul Ayesh is a lower Bittul, but it's a broken Bittul. And there's an advantage in Bittul Ayesh over Bittul B'Mitzias. There's an advantage of a simple bittul over a bittul of being included in godliness because of the brokenness. And Shchobra LaYachdav means that the advantage of Yichudei Allah, which is bittul based on the fact that godliness is enveloping you and lifting you up, is joined with the advantage of Yichudei Torah, which is bittul of subservience, of nothingness. It's like saying you're joining together the mile of the bittul of David HaMelech and the bittul of Yosef HaTzadik or Moshe Rabbeinu or Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That David's bittul was lower than their bittul, much lower. But David's bittul has a brokenness, as Daka, Shvaruach, Eshkein, and their bittul has a Yisreimamus. And Shchobra LaYachdav is joining these different levels of bittul together. And another example that the Rebbe brings is the idea of Yachid Levavenu, to join together the Pnimius Halev and the Chitzenius Halev, the inner heart and the outer heart. The inner heart of a Jew is his soul, higher than his mind. The outer heart of a Jew is his emotion, which is lower than his mind. And of course the huge difference between the two is that the outer heart is demonstrative passion, it's excited on the outside. The inner heart of the Jew is quiet and deep. And there's an advantage, obviously, to the inner heart. There's no limit. It's not defined by reason. It's an absolute sense of connection to the Eibishter, and it's quiet. While the outer heart, first of all, it's based on the mind, and second of all, has this outer passion. This outer passion has a chasarin. But there is the idea of perfecting imperfection. There's the idea of making right something which has a deficiency. And one of the ideas that the Tzemach Tzedek brings about Yahdiv is that you bring the advantage of Pnimiyas Alev to Chitonius Alev, meaning there can be a passion on the outside, a demonstrative passion, which is called in other places Murgash, and it should be perfect because it's unified with the Ahava of Pnimiyas Halev. And then the Rebbe also, Tzemach Tzedek also binds it to Tshuva Tata and Tshuva Elah, the lower Tshuva and the higher Tshuva. The lower Tshuva is because of Avedis, the higher Tshuva is because of returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, the principle is the same. The higher Tshuva is positive, it's rich, it's Madregas Avedis HaTzadikim. And the lower Tshuva is brokenness, joining together Irsha Chubra LaYachtav, joining together the lower Tshuva. And the higher Tshuva is joining together the brokenness of the heart of the Baal Tshuva on the basic level with the richness of the Baal Tshuva and the Madrega of becoming one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These are just a variety of different thoughts that the Tzemach Tzedek mentions. I'm touching on them, I'm not elaborating on them. And it's connected to the idea of Irsha Chubra LaYachtav, that Yerushalayim is a city that's all about the union and bringing together heaven and earth, and bringing together different aspects in the Avodas Hashem in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And ultimately, this bringing together is between a person and a person. The idea of Shalom, bringing together different people, and bringing together ourselves with the Eibishter. And both of these things, all of these things require struggle. All of these things are not perfect. They can be inexact, they can be quite inexact. And you don't quit. You draw strength from Yerushalayim to try and bind yourself up. You draw strength from Yerushalayim to try and create peace in yourself and peace with others. And peace in yourself and peace with the Eibishter.